The highway stretched endlessly before her, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through amber plains that seemed to breathe under the weight of the afternoon sun. Lila Moore gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles white against the worn leather. The radio had lost signal an hour ago, leaving only the hum of tires and the hollow echo of her own thoughts. She didn't cry anymore. The tears had dried up somewhere near the Wyoming border, replaced by a numbness that felt safer than the alternative. 3 months ago, she'd been trying on wedding dresses. 2 months ago, she'd walked into her apartment to find her fiancé and her best friend, her sister practically, wrapped in each other's arms on the couch she'd picked out. 1 month ago, she'd received the wedding invitation in the mail. Her name wasn't on it. Lila had sold everything, the apartment, the furniture, even the engagement ring, though the pawnshop owner had given her a pitying look that made her stomach twist. She'd packed her veterinary supplies, her sketchbooks, and a duffel bag of clothes, then pointed her truck west without a plan beyond a way. The job listing had appeared on a rural veterinary forum like a lifeline. Temporary vet nurse needed. Remote Montana ranch, room and board included. Must be comfortable with isolation and livestock. Isolation sounded like heaven. The GPS blinked weakly as she turned onto a dirt road flanked by wooden fencing. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still dusted with late winter snow despite the warming March air. Golden pastures rolled toward pine-covered ridges, and for the first time in weeks, Lila felt something other than emptiness, a faint flutter of curiosity. The sign at the entrance was simple: Turner Ranch Est, 1987. She drove slowly up the winding driveway, past grazing cattle and a red barn that looked like it had weathered 1,000 storms. The main house was modest, 2 stories of weathered wood and stone with a wide porch and rocking chairs that creaked gently in the breeze. A man stepped out as she parked, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair just long enough to curl at his collar. He wore a faded flannel shirt, jeans stained with mud, and boots that had seen better days. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes, pale grey, almost blue, were sharp and assessing. "Lila Moore!" His voice was low, roughened by years of outdoor work. "That's me." She climbed out of the truck, suddenly aware of how dusty and exhausted she must look. "Caleb Turner." He nodded once. "Welcome to Turner Ranch. Drive was long." "Long enough." She offered a tired smile, but the view made it worth it. Something flickered in his expression. Approval, maybe, or just acknowledgement. "June's got lunch ready. You can settle in after." Before Lila could respond, the screen door banged open and a woman in her late 60s appeared, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. Her face was round and kind, framed by silver hair pulled into a messy bun. "Goodness gracious, child, you look half-starved." June Carter bustled down the porch steps with surprising energy. "Come inside before you blow away. Harold, she's here." An elderly man with a weathered face and twinkling eyes emerged from the barn, tipping his hat. "Welcome, miss. Hope you're ready to work. Spring calving season's just starting." Lila felt something loosen in her chest. These people didn't know her story. They didn't pity her or whisper behind her back. They just welcomed her. "I'm ready," she said softly. And for the first time in months, she meant it. Lunch was hearty, beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie that melted on Lila's tongue. June kept up a steady stream of cheerful chatter about the ranch, the weather, and the upcoming spring cattle drive, while Harold interjected with dry humor that made even Caleb's stern expression soften slightly. "So you're a veterinary nurse?" Harold asked, spooning a second helping of stew into his bowl. "What made you want to work on a ranch?" Lila hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I needed a change of scenery. The city felt crowded." June patted her hand knowingly. "Sometimes a soul needs wide-open spaces to breathe again." Caleb said nothing, but Lila caught him watching her with those steady grey eyes. There was no judgment in his gaze, only a quiet understanding that made her throat tighten. After lunch, Caleb led her to the small cabin behind the main house. It was simple but clean. One room with a wood-burning stove, a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt, and a window overlooking the pasture. Wildflowers grew in untamed clusters near the fence line, swaying in the afternoon breeze. "Bathrooms shared with the bunkhouse, but the hands are respectful," Caleb said, setting her duffel bag inside. "You'll work with me and Harold mostly. We've got about 200 head of cattle, plus horses and a few goats. June handles the chickens. Sounds manageable. It's not easy work. His tone wasn't unkind, just factual. The winters are harsh, and we're still recovering from last year's wildfire. Lost a third of our grazing land. Lila nodded, remembering the blackened patches she'd seen from the road. I'm not afraid of hard work. Caleb studied her for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. Good, we could use the help. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Dinner's at 6, don't be late. June takes it personally. As his footsteps faded across the gravel, Lila sank onto the bed and let out a shaky breath. Through the window, she could see the mountains turning purple in the fading light, the sky streaked with gold and crimson. For the first time since everything fell apart, she felt something other than pain. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was close. That evening, after a simple dinner of roasted chicken and vegetables, the group gathered around a fire pit behind the main house. The flames danced and crackled, sending sparks spiraling into the darkening sky. Lila sat on a weathered log bench, nursing a mug of coffee while June told stories about the ranch's early days. And then Harold tried to lasso a runaway pig, June said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Ended up face first in the mud while the pig trotted away like royalty. Harold chuckled, shaking his head. That pig had more sense than me, I'll admit. Lila smiled, the warmth of the fire seeping into her bones. She'd almost forgotten what it felt like to sit among people without the weight of awkwardness or pity pressing down on her. A screen door creaked, and a boy emerged from the house, thin and wary, with Caleb's dark hair and a smattering of freckles across his nose. He held a book against his chest like a shield. Eli, come meet Miss Moore, Caleb called gently. The boy approached slowly, his hazel eyes flicking between Lila and the fire. Hi. Hi, Eli. Lila kept her voice soft, the way she did with nervous animals. Your dad says you help with the horses. He nodded, a hint of pride breaking through his shyness. I feed the foals every morning. They like apples. I'd love to see them sometime. I used to draw horses when I was your age. Interest flickered in his eyes. You draw? I do. Animals, mostly. It helps me understand them better. Eli glanced at his father, who gave a subtle nod of permission. Maybe you could show me. I'd like that. The boy settled onto the log beside her, still clutching his book, but no longer quite so guarded. Across the fire, Caleb watched them with an expression Lila couldn't quite read, something between surprise and cautious relief. As the fire burned low and the stars emerged one by one, Lila realized she hadn't thought about him, about the betrayal, the wedding, the life she'd left behind. For hours, the mountains stood silent and eternal in the darkness. The wind whispered through the pines, and for the first time in a long time, Lila felt like maybe, just maybe, she could breathe again. The days fell into a rhythm as natural as breathing. Lila woke before dawn to the sound of roosters and the distant lowing of cattle. She'd pull on work boots and a flannel jacket, then make her way to the barn where Caleb and Harold were already moving through morning chores with practiced efficiency. Her first real test came on her third day, when Caleb led her to a small outbuilding that had once served as the ranch's veterinary clinic. Now it was cluttered with outdated equipment, dusty shelves, and cobwebs thick enough to catch the morning light. This was Sarah's project, Caleb said quietly, running his hand along a wooden exam table. My wife. She wanted to make the ranch more self-sufficient, handle basic medical care ourselves. Lila noticed the past tense, the way his jaw tightened slightly. She didn't push. It's a good setup, she said instead, surveying the space. With some cleaning and restocking, it could be functional again. Think you can handle it? Give me a week. Something that might have been a smile ghosted across his face. You're on. Lila threw herself into the work. She scrubbed every surface until the clinic gleamed, organized supplies, and made a list of what needed ordering. Harold helped her repair a broken cabinet, while June brought lemonade and encouragement. In the afternoons, she worked with the livestock. She treated a cow with mastitis, helped Harold deliver a breech calf, and spent patient hours gaining the trust of a skittish mare that had been injured in the wildfire. The mare, a dappled grey named Willow, had scars along her right flank and a terror of sudden movements. Lila would sit in the paddock with her sketchbook drawing the other horses, while Willow watched from a safe distance. Slowly, over days, The mare crept closer. "You've got a gift," Harold remarked one afternoon, leaning against the fence as Willow finally ate an apple from Lila's outstretched hand. "Not everyone has the patience for broken things." Lila stroked the mare's soft nose, feeling the animal's breath warm against her palm. "I think broken things understand each other." Harold's expression softened with something that looked like grandfatherly affection. "Reckon that's true." Eli became her shadow. The boy was quiet and cautious, but his curiosity about the animals and Lila's sketches gradually drew him out of his shell. They'd sit together in the barn after his homework was done, Lila teaching him how to observe the subtle signs of an animal's mood, the angle of ears, the tension in muscles, the rhythm of breathing. "Why do you draw them?" Eli asked one evening, watching her sketch a newborn calf curled in the straw. "Because when I draw something, I have to really see it," Lila explained, shading the curve of the calf's spine. "Not just glance at it, but notice every detail. It makes me slow down and pay attention." "Dad says Mom used to paint." Eli's voice was small, but all her paintings burned in the fire. Lila's hand stilled. "I'm sorry. It's okay. I don't remember her much anyway. I was only 7. He picked at a loose thread on his jeans. "Dad doesn't like to talk about it." "Grief is like that sometimes," Lila said gently. "It doesn't mean he loved her any less. Sometimes the things that matter most are the hardest to put into words." Eli nodded slowly, then pointed at her sketchbook. Could you teach me to draw like that?" "I'd be honored." From then on, they spent their evenings sketching together, Eli's strokes growing more confident, his observations sharper. Lila showed him how to capture movement, how to suggest texture with simple lines. And when he presented his first completed drawing to his father, a surprisingly good rendering of Caleb's horse, Buck, she watched Caleb's expression transform from surprise to something raw and grateful. "This is real good, son," Caleb said, his voice rough. His eyes met Lila's across the kitchen table, and she saw the silent thank you there. But it was the quiet moments with Caleb himself that began to unsettle her in ways she hadn't expected. He rarely spoke more than necessary, but his presence was solid and steady. He moved through the ranch with the quiet competence of a man who'd spent his whole life reading the land and the animals. He was kind to his employees, patient with his son, and carried the weight of the ranch's survival on his shoulders without complaint. Lila found herself noticing small things, the way his hands gentled when handling a nervous animal, the slight smile that tugged at his mouth when Eli said something clever, the exhaustion that lined his face at the end of long days, and the way he'd still check every fence line, every water trough, before allowing himself to rest. One evening, she found him in the barn long after everyone else had gone to bed. He was repairing a saddle by lamplight, his movements methodical and focused. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked from the doorway. He glanced up, unsurprised. "Could ask you the same." "Too quiet," she admitted, stepping inside. Back in the city there was always noise, sirens, traffic, neighbors fighting through thin walls. Here the silence is almost loud. She smiled. "Exactly." Caleb set down his tools and gestured to an empty hay bale. Lila sat, tucking her hands into her jacket pockets against the chill. "You settling in okay?" he asked. "Better than okay. Everyone's been kind. The work is healing, in a way. Harold says you got Willow eating from your hand. That's not easy. She just needed someone to be patient with her." Lila watched the lamplight flicker across the barn's wooden beams. "To not push or demand, just wait until she was ready." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then, carefully, "June mentioned you left the city pretty sudden. You don't have to talk about it, but if you ever want to—" Lila's throat tightened. Part of her wanted to deflect, to keep the walls firmly in place. But something about the darkness, the safety of this space, loosened her tongue. "My fiancé married my best friend," she said simply. "They sent me a wedding invitation." Caleb's expression darkened with quiet anger. "That's cruel." The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. Lila surprised herself with the admission. It was realizing I'd built my whole life around someone who never really saw me. I was convenient, comfortable, but not essential. Their loss. The words were blunt, matter-of-fact, but they carried a weight that made Lila's eyes sting. "I keep wondering if I'll ever trust anyone again," she whispered. Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I don't have an answer for that. After Sarah died, I thought I'd never feel anything but empty. Some days I still don't. But Eli needed me to keep going, so I did. And somewhere along the way, the emptiness started to hurt less. Does it ever go away completely? No. But it becomes something you can carry without it crushing you. They sat in comfortable silence, the smell of hay and leather and wood smoke wrapping around them like a blanket. Outside, an owl called into the night. "Thank you," Lila said eventually, "for giving me a place to land. Thank you for bringing this place back to life." Caleb's voice was quiet, but there was something in it that made Lila's heart skip. "We needed you more than you know." Spring crept closer, bringing longer days and the promise of new growth. Ben Hollis, one of the ranch hands, started teasing Lila good-naturedly about her city girl roots, though his flirtation was light and harmless. He was charming in an easy way, quick with a joke, always ready to lend a hand, and genuinely kind. "You know," Ben said one afternoon while they mended a fence together, "if you ever want to see what passes for nightlife around here, there's a decent bar in town. Leaf music on Fridays." Lila smiled, hammering a nail into place. "That's sweet, Ben, but I think I'm good with quiet nights for now." "Can't blame a guy for trying." He grinned, then added more seriously, "You're good for this place, Lila, and for Caleb and Eli. They've been stuck, I guess, since the fire. You're helping them remember how to move forward. I'm not trying to fix anyone. I know. That's why it works." The turning point came on a gray afternoon in early April. Lila was in the lower pasture checking on the pregnant mares when the sky suddenly darkened. What had been a gentle drizzle turned into a torrential downpour within minutes, the kind of sudden mountain storm that transforms dry creek beds into raging rivers. She heard the panicked whinnying before she saw them. 3 foals trapped on the wrong side of a rapidly rising stream, separated from their mothers by 20 feet of churning brown water. Lila didn't think. She dropped her bag and waded into the current, the cold shocking her system. The water was already knee-deep and rising, pulling at her legs with alarming strength. "Come on, babies," she called, her voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. "Come to me." The first foal, braver than the others, took a tentative step into the water. Lila grabbed its halter and guided it across, her boots slipping on the muddy bottom. She pushed the foal toward higher ground, then turned back for the others. The second foal was more terrified, rearing and splashing. The water was waist-deep now, the current strong enough to make Lila stumble. She managed to get a rope around the foal's neck and began pulling, her muscles screaming with effort. "Lila!" She looked up to see Caleb running toward her through the rain, his face set with determination and fear. He plunged into the water without hesitation, reaching her side in seconds. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted over the storm. "The foals!" "I can see that." He grabbed the rope, his strength making the task easier. Together they hauled the frightened animal across the stream. The third foal was the smallest, and the most terrified. It was pressed against a boulder, trembling and wide-eyed. The water was chest-deep on Lila now, the current threatening to sweep her legs out from under her. Caleb saw her determination. "I'll get it. You get to shore." "Together," Lila insisted. They moved as one, Caleb lifting the foal bodily, while Lila guided them through the current. The water surged, and for one terrifying moment, Lila lost her footing. Caleb's hand shot out, gripping her arm with bruising force and keeping her upright. "I've got you," he said fiercely. "I've got you." They made it to the bank, collapsing on the muddy grass with the foal between them. The rain continued to pour, plastering their hair to their faces and turning the world into a blur of grey and green. Lila was shaking, from cold, from adrenaline, from the enormity of what had almost happened. Caleb pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her with a protectiveness that felt like coming home. "You could have been killed," he said into her wet hair, his voice ragged. "You could have, but I wasn't." She pulled back enough to look at him, rain streaming down both their faces. "And the foals are safe." His eyes searched hers, and something in his expression cracked open. "You're impossible. I've been told that before." And then, with the storm raging around them and 3 shivering foals huddled nearby, Caleb kissed her. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was desperate and real, tasting of rain and fear and relief. Lila kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his soaked shirt, pouring months of loneliness and longing into the connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I didn't want this," he whispered. "I didn't want to feel this again. I know, but I can't stop it." "I know," Lila repeated, her voice breaking. "Me neither." They stayed like that for a long moment, tangled together in the rain before the practical demands of ranching pulled them apart. They needed to get the foals to shelter, to check on the rest of the herd, to assess the damage from the storm. But something had shifted between them, something neither of them could take back. That night, after the ranch had settled and the storm had passed, they gathered around the fire pit as usual. But the air felt different, charged with unspoken words and new possibilities. June kept giving them knowing looks over her coffee mug. Harold hummed contentedly while whittling a piece of wood. Eli sat between Lila and Caleb, showing them his latest sketch, a surprisingly good rendering of the storm clouds. "Think the creek will go down by morning?" Ben asked, stretching his legs toward the fire. "Should," Caleb replied. "We'll need to check the fences in the lower pasture, though." "That current was strong. Good thing Lila got to the foals when she did," Harold said pointedly. "Could have lost them otherwise." Lila felt Caleb's hand brush against hers in the darkness between their chairs. A subtle touch, almost accidental, but deliberate enough to make her breath catch. "Could have lost more than that," Caleb said quietly, his eyes meeting hers across the firelight. The flames danced and crackled, sending sparks spiraling into the clear night sky. Above them stars began to emerge, thousands of them, bright and unwavering in the mountain darkness. Lila looked at the people around her, this strange, wonderful family she'd stumbled into. At Eli, who'd trusted her with his grief and his creativity. At June and Harold, who'd welcomed her without question. At Ben, whose easy friendship had made her laugh again. And at Caleb, whose quiet strength had begun to heal wounds she'd thought were permanent. "The stars are beautiful here," she said softly. "They don't shine like this in the city," Caleb replied, his voice equally quiet. "Too much light pollution. Out here you can see everything." "Everything," Lila echoed, and she wasn't just talking about stars anymore. The week after the storm passed in a blur of activity and unspoken tension. Lila and Caleb moved around each other with a new awareness. Their interactions charged with possibility neither seemed quite ready to name. They worked side by side repairing storm damage, fence posts driven crooked by the flood, debris scattered across the lower pastures, a section of the barn roof that needed patching. Their hands would brush, reaching for the same tool. Their eyes would meet across the breakfast table, holding for a beat too long before one of them looked away. At night, around the fire, Caleb would sit closer than before, his presence a warm, steady weight beside her. But they didn't kiss again, didn't talk about what had happened in the rain. It was as if they'd both silently agreed that acknowledging it would make it real, and real meant risk. June, predictably, had no patience for such nonsense. "You two are dancing around each other like nervous colts," she announced one morning, cornering Lila in the kitchen while the men were out checking the herd. "It's painful to watch." Lila focused intently on the coffee pot. "I don't know what you mean. Honey, I've been married to Harold for 43 years. I know what feelings look like, and I know what fear looks like. You've got both." Lila's shoulders sagged. "It's complicated. Love always is." June handed her a mug, her expression softening. "But let me tell you something. After Sarah died, Caleb shut down. He was a good father, a good rancher, but he stopped being a man who hoped for things. Just survived day after day. And then you showed up." "June, let me finish." The older woman's eyes were kind but firm. "I've watched him come back to life these past weeks. Watched him smile at something silly," Eli said. "Watched him actually taste his food instead of just eating to fuel up. That's because of you. Or maybe he was ready to heal anyway. Maybe. But healing happens faster when you've got someone walking beside you." June squeezed her arm gently. "Don't let fear steal something good, Lila. You've both already lost enough." That afternoon, a dusty sedan pulled up the ranch driveway, an unfamiliar vehicle that made everyone look up from their work. Lila was in the paddock with Willow when she heard Caleb's voice, tense with surprise. "Emma, what are you doing here?" A woman emerged from the car, mid-30s, polished in a way that spoke of city living, with sleek dark hair and expensive sunglasses. She looked utterly out of place against the backdrop of mud and livestock. "Caleb," Her smile was warm but carried an edge of determination. "I tried calling, but you never answered. I've been busy." "I can see that." Emma's gaze swept across the ranch, lingering on the repaired barn, the freshly painted fences. "The place looks better than I expected. I heard about the flood." "We managed." Lila watched from a distance, an uncomfortable knot forming in her stomach. There was history in the way they stood together, the ease of old familiarity mixed with something unresolved. Ben appeared at Lila's side, his usual grin absent. "That's Emma Pritchard," he said quietly. "Sarah's sister. She and Caleb were close after Sarah died. Some folks thought they might." He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. Dinner that night was awkward. Emma had been invited to stay by June, who had a tendency to extend hospitality to everyone, and she sat at the table with practiced ease, asking questions about the ranch's operations and complimenting June's cooking. She was nice, Lila realized with sinking dismay. Not a villain or an obstacle, just a woman who clearly cared about Caleb and Eli, who had history with this place and these people. "Eli's gotten so big," Emma said, smiling at the boy who ducked his head shyly. "You look just like your mom." "Dad says I have her smile," Eli offered quietly. "You do." Emma's expression was genuinely warm. Then her eyes shifted to Lila. "And you must be the veterinary nurse Caleb mentioned." "Lila, right? That's me. It's wonderful that you're here. This place needs someone with medical expertise." Emma turned back to Caleb. "I've been thinking, with the ranch doing better, maybe it's time to consider expansion. I know some investors who might be interested in—" "I'm not interested in investors," Caleb said, his tone polite but final. "We're doing fine on our own. But you could do more than fine. With proper capital, you could rebuild the grazing land faster, hire more help, maybe even expand into organic beef." "Emma," Caleb set down his fork, "I appreciate the thought, but I'm not looking to turn this place into something it's not." An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. Emma's smile faltered, and Lila saw something flash in her eyes. Hurt, maybe, or frustration. After dinner, Lila escaped to her cabin. She told herself she was being ridiculous, that she had no claim on Caleb, that Emma's arrival shouldn't matter. But the knot in her chest didn't loosen. A knock on her door startled her. She opened it to find Caleb standing on the small porch, hands shoved in his pockets, looking uncertain in a way that was somehow endearing. "Can we talk?" he asked. Lila stepped aside and he entered, his presence immediately making the small cabin feel smaller. He stood awkwardly in the center of the room as if unsure how to begin. "Emma showing up like that, I should have warned you. You don't owe me explanations," Lila said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Yes, I do." Caleb met her eyes. "After Sarah died, Emma was there. She helped with Eli, kept the ranch running when I could barely function. We were close and people assumed we'd eventually become more than friends. Did you want that? I thought I might. She's family in a way. Safe. Familiar." He paused, his jaw tight. "But I never felt with her what I feel when you're around." Lila's breath caught. "Caleb, I don't know what I'm doing," he continued, his voice rough with honesty. "I haven't done this in years, and I'm probably making a mess of it. But when I thought you might drown in that flood, when I saw you risk yourself for those foals—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I realized I'd already fallen, and I didn't want to, but I did anyway." The confession hung between them, raw and vulnerable. "I've fallen too," Lila whispered, "and it terrifies me." "Me too." They stood facing each other in the lamplight, two broken people who'd somehow found each other in the middle of nowhere. Caleb reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face in his calloused hands. "I don't want to hurt you," he said. "Then don't." This kiss was different from the one in the storm. Slower, deeper, weighted with intention. Lila's arms wound around his neck, and Caleb pulled her closer, as if he could anchor her to this moment, to this place, to him. When they finally separated, both breathing unevenly, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he said quietly. "Not just for the season. Stay. I don't know if I can." "Why not?" "Because I'm still scared," Lila wanted to say. "Because I don't know if I believe in happy endings anymore. Because what if I let myself love this place, these people, you, and it all falls apart again?" But before she could voice any of it, Another knock interrupted them. Emma stood in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. "Sorry to interrupt. I wanted to say goodbye before I head back to town. Early flight tomorrow." "Of course," Caleb said, stepping back from Lila with visible reluctance. "I'll walk you out." Emma's gaze flickered between them, and understanding and resignation settled in her features. "Take care, Lila. You're good for him." When they were gone, Lila sank onto her bed, her emotions a tangled mess. Through the window, she could see Caleb and Emma talking by her car, their silhouettes outlined by the porch light. Their conversation lasted only a few minutes before Emma hugged him briefly and drove away. Caleb stood watching the taillights disappear down the road. Then he turned back toward the cabin, toward Lila, and even from a distance she could see the determination in his stance. He was choosing her, choosing this. Now she just had to find the courage to choose it too. The next morning, a letter arrived for Lila. She recognized the return address immediately, the veterinary clinic in her old city, offering her a permanent position with excellent benefits and a substantial salary. It was everything she'd worked toward before her life imploded. Stable, respected, familiar. She stared at the letter for a long time, then tucked it into her journal without showing anyone. The annual spring cattle drive was a week away, the ranch's biggest event of the year. It would mark the official end of her temporary contract. After that, she'd have to decide stay or leave. June and Harold began preparations with the enthusiasm of people who lived for such traditions. They planned a huge bonfire celebration, invited neighboring ranches, arranged for a local band to play, and started cooking enough food to feed a small army. "This is the heart of ranch life," Harold explained to Lila as they strung lights between the barn and the main house. "Celebrating survival. Another winter past, another spring beginning. It's a reminder that hard times don't last forever." "Do good times last?" Lila asked quietly. Harold gave her a shrewd look. "Only if you're brave enough to hold on to them." Eli had become more open, his drawings increasingly confident. He'd started showing them to other people, to Ben, to June, even tentatively to his father. Caleb handled each sketch with reverence, praising the details, asking questions about technique. One evening, Eli showed Lila a drawing he'd been working on in secret, a portrait of his mother, recreated from an old photograph. "I didn't want to forget what she looked like," he said, his voice small. "But I can't remember her voice anymore." Lila's heart broke. "That's okay, Eli. Our memories change over time. What matters is that you carry her love with you. Do you think she'd like you?" The question caught Lila off guard. I hope so. I think she would." Eli looked up at her with his father's serious eyes. "You make Dad smile. He hasn't smiled like that in a long time. You make him smile too. Fair's different with you." Eli hesitated, then added shyly, "I like having you here. It feels like we're a family again." Lila pulled him into a hug, blinking back tears. "I like being here too." 2 days before the cattle drive, Lila made her decision. She found Caleb in the barn at sunset, brushing down Buck after a long day of moving the herd to fresh pasture. He looked up when she entered, and his expression softened immediately. Hey. Lila leaned against the stall door, gathering her courage. "I got a job offer. Back in the city, good position, great pay." Caleb's hand stilled on the brush. "When do you leave?" "I'm not going." His head snapped up. "What?" "I'm not going," Lila repeated, stronger now. "I'm staying if the offer still stands." Caleb set down the brush carefully, as if he didn't trust his hands to remain steady. "It stands. I know it's crazy. I've only been here a few months. I barely know you. But I feel more at home here than I ever did in the city. And She took a breath. "I don't want to run anymore. I want to stay and build something real." Caleb crossed the space between them in 3 strides, lifting her off her feet and spinning her once before setting her down and kissing her breathless. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with emotion. "You're sure?" "Terrified, but sure." He laughed, a real, genuine laugh that transformed his whole face. "Good. That's good." "Caleb?" Lila touched his face gently. "I think I'm falling in love with you." "I think I already fell." He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise rather than a question. "Welcome home, Lila." From the barn door, they heard a whoop of joy. Eli stood there with June and Harold behind him, all three grinning like fools. "Took you long enough," Harold called. June was dabbing at her eyes with her apron. About time this ranch had something to celebrate. Eli ran to them, and Caleb scooped him up with one arm while keeping the other around Lila. The boy hugged them both fiercely. "Does this mean you're staying forever?" Eli asked. "If you'll have me." "Yes." Eli's joy was uncomplicated and pure. "You can teach me more drawing and help with the foals and—" "One thing at a time," Caleb said, laughing. But his eyes never left Lila's face, and the happiness there was almost overwhelming. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Lila realized she'd found what she'd been looking for all along. Not an escape from pain, but a place where healing was possible. Not a perfect life, but a real one, built on honesty and hard work, and the quiet courage of choosing love despite fear. The stars were beginning to emerge, one by one, bright and steady in the darkening sky. And for the first time in forever, Lila believed they were shining just for her. The morning of the spring cattle drive dawned clear and bright, the kind of Montana spring day that felt like a gift. The sky stretched endless and blue above the valley, and wildflowers had begun to bloom in riotous color across the pastures. Lupines, Indian paintbrush, and delicate mountain asters nodding in the breeze. Lila woke early, not from habit, but from excitement. She dressed quickly and headed to the main house, where the kitchen was already alive with activity. June commanded the space like a general, directing Harold and several neighbor women in the preparation of what seemed like enough food to feed half the county. "Morning, dear," June said cheerfully, pressing a cup of coffee into Lila's hands. "Caleb's already out with the herd. They'll be bringing the cattle in around noon. What can I do to help?" "You can take these sandwiches out to the boys and then help me finish the coleslaw." Lila loaded sandwiches into a basket and hiked out to the upper pasture, where Caleb, Ben, and several hands from neighboring ranches were guiding the cattle toward the main compound. It was beautiful to watch. The coordination between riders and horses, the way the dogs worked the edges of the herd, the patient, steady movement of hundreds of animals across the land. Caleb saw her approaching and rode over, dismounting with easy grace. His hat was dusty, his face wind-burned, and he'd never looked better. "Brought lunch," Lila said, offering the basket. "You're a lifesaver." He took a sandwich, but didn't immediately eat it, just stood looking at her with an expression that made her heart skip. "You sleep okay?" "Better than okay," she smiled. "No second thoughts, if that's what you're asking." "Good." He glanced around to make sure they had a moment of privacy, then leaned down and kissed her softly. "Because I'm not letting you go. I'm counting on it." Ben rode up, grinning. "You two are going to make the cattle jealous with all that sweetness." Caleb rolled his eyes but didn't let go of Lila's hand. "How's the count?" "All present and accounted for. We'll be at the pens by noon. Easy." By early afternoon, the ranch was transformed. Trucks and trailers lined the driveway as neighbors and friends arrived from surrounding properties. Children ran shrieking between the buildings, while adults gathered in clusters, trading stories and catching up on winter news. Long tables had been set up near the fire pit, laden with food, barbecued ribs, corn on the cob, potato salad, fresh bread, and enough desserts to constitute a health hazard. A small stage had been erected near the barn, where members of a local country band were tuning their instruments. Lila found herself swept into the festivities, meeting dozens of people whose names she tried desperately to remember. Everyone was friendly, curious about the new veterinary nurse who'd tamed Caleb Turner's heart. As one elderly rancher put it with a wink. "Don't let them overwhelm you," Caleb murmured during a brief moment of respite. "They mean well, but they gossip like nobody's business." "I can handle it." Lila squeezed his hand. "Besides, I like seeing you in your element. You're different here, more relaxed." "That's because you're here." Before she could respond, Eli appeared, tugging on her sleeve. "Miss Lila, come see, I drew something for the celebration." He led her to the barn, where someone had set up an impromptu art display, sketches and paintings from various ranch children. Eli's contribution was prominently displayed. A large detailed drawing of the ranch with all its people, including Lila kneeling beside Willow in the paddock. "Eli, this is beautiful," Lila breathed. "You've gotten so good." "It's everyone who makes the ranch home," Eli explained seriously. "I wanted to show that." Caleb had followed them and stood staring at his son's artwork with undisguised emotion. He pulled Eli against his side in a one-armed hug. "I'm proud of you, son." "Thanks, Dad." Eli beamed, then darted off to rejoin his friends. Caleb turned to Lila. "Thank you for giving him that. The drawing, the confidence. He's been different since you arrived, lighter somehow. He just needed someone to listen, and maybe to show him that it's okay to create, even when things are hard. Is that what you did? Create your way through the hard things?" Lila thought of her sketchbooks, filled with drawings from these past months. Animals, landscapes, and increasingly, people. Eli laughing, June in the kitchen, Caleb on horseback against the mountains. "I drew my way towards something better," she said softly. "Toward this." As the sun began its descent, the celebration truly began. The band started playing, fiddles and guitars weaving together in songs that spoke of land and loss and endurance. People danced on the packed earth near the fire pit, their movements ranging from expert two-stepping to enthusiastic stumbling. Harold swept June into a surprisingly graceful waltz, while Ben claimed one of the neighbor's daughters for a lively polka. Eli and the other children wove between the dancers, laughing and dodging feet. Caleb extended his hand to Lila. "Dance with me? I should warn you, I'm not very good at this." "Neither am I." But when she stepped into his arms, it felt natural. They moved slowly, ignoring the tempo of the music, creating their own rhythm. Caleb's hand was warm on her back, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I'd have this again," Caleb said quietly. "Not just the feeling, but the hope. After Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was done, that I'd just focus on Eli and the ranch and that would be enough. And now? Now I realize I was just surviving, not living. You changed that." Lila looked up at him. "You changed it for me too. I came here broken, convinced I'd never trust anyone again. But you're steady, real. You see me, not who you want me to be, but who I actually am. And you stay anyway, always," Caleb promised, and kissed her there in the firelight, surrounded by music and laughter and community. When they broke apart, someone in the crowd whistled approvingly. June was dabbing at her eyes again, and even Harold looked suspiciously emotional. As the night deepened and the fire burned lower, people began to drift home. The band played softer songs now, ballads about home and belonging. Children had fallen asleep in their parents' arms, and the conversations had mellowed into comfortable murmurs. Lila sat on a hay bale near the fire, Eli drowsing against her shoulder, while Caleb added another log to the flames. The sparks spiraled upward, dancing among the stars. "You know what today reminded me of?" Harold said from his spot beside June. "That first spring after we bought this place, 40 years ago now. We didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, but we invited everyone we knew for a barbecue. Wanted to put down roots, become part of the community. And we did," June added, her hand finding Harold's. "Built a whole life here, raised our children, weathered droughts and bad markets and personal heartbreaks. But we had each other, and we had this land, and that was enough." "It's always enough," Harold agreed, "when you're with the right people." Ben, one of the few remaining guests, raised his beer bottle. "To new beginnings, and to Lila, for reminding us all that good things are still possible." "To Lila," the group echoed, and she felt her throat tighten with gratitude. Later, after the last guests had departed and Eli had been tucked into bed, Lila and Caleb walked the perimeter of the ranch together. The moon was nearly full, bright enough to cast shadows across the pastures. Willow nickered softly from her paddock as they passed, and the sound of crickets filled the air. "I want to show you something," Caleb said, leading her toward a small rise beyond the barn. They climbed to the top, where a weathered bench sat facing west. The view was breathtaking. The valley spread below them, silver in the moonlight, with the mountains rising dark and eternal beyond. "Sarah and I used to come here," Caleb said quietly, "when things got hard, or when we just needed perspective. She called it her thinking spot." Lila tensed slightly. "Caleb, if this place is special," "It is special, and I want to share it with you." He sat, pulling her down beside him. "Sarah would have liked you. She'd have appreciated how you care for the animals, how you've helped Eli come out of his shell. She always said this ranch needed someone who understood that healing takes patience. I wish I could have known her." Me too. Caleb was quiet for a moment. For a long time I felt guilty for even thinking about moving forward, like being happy again would somehow dishonor her memory. But June said something that helped. Sarah would want us to live, not just survive. She'd want Eli to have joy in his life, and she'd want me to find love again if I was lucky enough. Are you sure? I'm sure. Caleb turned to face her fully. I love you, Lila. I know it's fast, and I know we've both got scars that are still healing. But I love you and I want to build a life with you, here on this ranch with Eli. Lila's eyes filled with tears, happy ones for once. I love you too. I love Eli. I love this place. I love the life we're building. Then stay. Not just for a season or a year. Stay permanently, be part of this family. Yes, Lila whispered, then stronger. Yes. Caleb kissed her deeply, and in that moment, everything else fell away. The past hurts, the fears, the uncertainties. There was only this, the two of them under the Montana sky, choosing each other, choosing hope. When they finally stood to return to the house, Lila paused to look back at the view one more time. The stars were impossibly bright, scattered like diamonds across the darkness. I used to think the city lights were beautiful, she said, but they're nothing compared to this. The stars keep shining, Caleb said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. Out here you can always find your way home by them. And this time, Lila added, leaning into his warmth, I'm staying. 7 months later. The rescue barn stood at the edge of the property, a modest but sturdy structure that Lila had designed herself with Caleb's help. The sign above the door read, Turner Ranch Animal Rescue in simple letters, and inside, 5 stalls housed animals recovering from injury or neglect. A young horse with a damaged leg, 2 goats whose previous owner had surrendered them, and a pair of barn cats who'd shown up one day and simply never left. Lila moved through her morning routine with practiced ease, checking bandages, distributing medications, making notes in her detailed charts. She'd been officially hired as the ranch's full-time veterinarian, and the rescue barn had become her special project, a place where broken things could heal just as she had. Through the open barn door, she could see Caleb and Eli working on a new corral. They moved in comfortable synchronization, the boy mimicking his father's careful measurements and precise hammering. Eli had grown over the summer, all gangly limbs and increasing confidence. He still sketched constantly, but now he also helped with the livestock, rode fence lines with his father, and had even started teaching younger children at the community center how to draw. "Morning, boss lady," Ben called, leading a horse toward the barn. "Got a customer for you. This mare's favoring her front left. Want to take a look?" "Of course." Lila grabbed her examination kit. "How's she been otherwise?" "Eating fine, no fever, just a slight limp since yesterday." As Lila examined the horse, her hands moving with the gentle competence that had become her trademark, she felt Caleb's presence before she saw him. He leaned against the barn door, watching her work with an expression that still made her heart skip. "Need an extra set of hands?" he asked. "Always." They worked together seamlessly, Caleb steadying the horse while Lila cleaned and wrapped a minor abscess. Their movements had the ease of people who'd learned each other's rhythms, who could communicate with glances and subtle gestures. "Clinic looks good," Caleb commented as they finished. "You've built something special here." "We built something special," Lila corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without your help, and June's, and Harold's. They love having you here. June told me yesterday that you're the daughter she never had." Lila smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. She'd been welcomed into this family completely, invited to Sunday dinners and holiday planning sessions, and the thousands of small moments that constituted real belonging. Her old life felt like a distant dream now. She occasionally received updates through social media. Her ex and former best friend had a baby, had bought a house in the suburbs, seemed perfectly happy. It didn't hurt anymore. That life had never really fit her and she'd simply been too afraid to admit it. But this life, mornings in the barn, afternoons on horseback checking fence lines, evenings around the fire pit with people who'd become family, this fit perfectly. That afternoon, Lila drove into town for supplies. She'd become a familiar face at the feed store, the hardware shop, the small cafe where locals gathered for coffee and gossip. People waved as she passed, called out greetings, asked about the rescue barn's progress. At the post office, she collected a package and a handful of letters. One envelope bore an address she recognized, her sister Megan, the one person from her old life she'd maintained contact with. Lila opened it in the truck. "Dear Lila, I know it's been too long since I wrote. Work has been crazy, but that's no excuse. I wanted you to know that I'm so proud of you. When you first left, I was worried. You seemed so hurt, so lost. But your letters and photos show someone who's found exactly where she belongs. Mum asks about you constantly. She'd never admit it, but I think she regrets not being more supportive when everything fell apart. She started telling people her daughter is a veterinarian at a Montana ranch, and she brags about your rescue barn to anyone who'll listen. As for your ex and her, well, I see them occasionally at mutual friends gatherings. They seem fine, but there's something missing. A spark, maybe. They look like people going through the motions of life rather than really living it. You, on the other hand, look radiant in every photo you send. That cowboy of yours must be something special. Come visit when you can. I'd love to meet Caleb and Eli, see this ranch you've fallen in love with. But I understand if Montana has become home in a way this city never was. Love always, Megan." Lila folded the letter carefully, emotion tightening her throat. She made a mental note to call Megan soon, maybe even invite her to visit in the fall when the aspens turned gold and the mountains wore their most beautiful colors. That evening, June hosted a dinner to celebrate the rescue barn's official opening. The kitchen table was crowded. Caleb and Eli, Harold and June, Ben and his girlfriend Sarah, who'd been introduced at the summer rodeo and was already being welcomed into the extended ranch family, and several neighbors who'd helped with construction. The conversation flowed easily. Stories about stubborn cattle, plans for the upcoming winter, gentle teasing about Ben's hopeless attempts to teach Sarah how to rope. Lila sat between Caleb and Eli, soaking in the warmth and laughter, feeling so full of contentment she thought she might burst. "Speech," Harold called, raising his glass of apple cider. Lila should say a few words about the rescue barn. Everyone turned to her expectantly. Lila stood, her cheeks warming. "I'm not good at speeches," she began, "but I want to thank you all. 6 months ago, I showed up here, broken and lost, running from a life that had fallen apart. I thought I was just looking for a place to hide. Instead, I found a home." Her voice thickened with emotion. "You welcomed me without judgment. You taught me that healing isn't about forgetting the past. It's about building something new. The rescue barn represents that for me. It's a place where wounded animals can recover and find new families, a place where second chances are possible." She looked at Caleb, then at Eli, then around the table at all these beloved faces. "I came here as a stranger. You made me family. That's a gift I'll never take for granted." "To family," June said, raising her glass. "To second chances," Harold added. "To home," Caleb finished, his eyes holding Lila's. They drank, and then the conversation resumed its comfortable rhythm. But Caleb's hand found Lila's under the table, his fingers interlacing with hers, a silent promise, a continued choosing. After dinner, as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Lila and Caleb walked out to their spot on the rise. It had become their ritual, watching the sunset together, talking about the day, planning for the future. "Eli wants to know if he can get a dog," Caleb said, pulling her close against the evening chill. "He's been hinting for weeks." "What did you tell him?" "That if he proves he can handle the responsibility, we'll consider it in the spring." Caleb paused. "I also told him we should probably ask you first, since you'd be the one treating it if it got sick." "Ask me." Lila looked up at him. "Caleb, this is your ranch, your home. It's our home now." His voice was firm. "I want you to feel like this is your place too. Not just somewhere you work, but somewhere you belong completely." Lila's heart swelled. "I already do feel that way." "Good." Caleb reached into his pocket, and Lila's breath caught as he pulled out a small velvet box. "Because I was hoping you'd make it official." He opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful ring, a small diamond flanked by 2 sapphires the color of Montana's summer sky. "Lila Moore," Caleb said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I know we've only been together 6 months. Some people would say that's too fast. But when you've spent years in darkness, you recognize light when you see it. You're my light. You brought joy back to this ranch, gave my son a mother figure who truly sees him, and made me believe in happy endings again." He dropped to one knee, and Lila felt tears streaming down her face. "Will you marry me? Will you stay here forever, build this life with us, grow old watching sunsets from this hill?" "Yes," Lila whispered. Then louder, "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." Caleb stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her as the sun sank below the mountains and the first stars began to emerge. When they broke apart, both laughing and crying, they heard a whoop from the direction of the house. Eli was running toward them, with June and Harold and Ben and Sarah trailing behind. The boy launched himself at them, and Caleb caught him easily, pulling both Eli and Lila into a three-way hug. "Does this mean Lila's going to be my mom?" Eli asked, his voice muffled against their shoulders. "If you're okay with that," Lila said gently. Eli pulled back, his face split by the widest smile she'd ever seen. "I'm more than okay. I've been hoping you'd stay forever. Then, forever it is." June was openly crying now, and even Harold looked misty-eyed. Ben shook Caleb's hand enthusiastically, while Sarah hugged Lila, whispering congratulations. They all walked back to the house together, already making excited plans for a small ranch wedding in the fall. The fire pit was lit, and they gathered around it as the stars multiplied overhead, thousands of brilliant points of light against the velvet darkness. Lila leaned against Caleb's shoulder. Eli curled up on her other side and felt a peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. This was what happiness looked like, not the absence of pain, but the presence of people who chose to love you through it. Not a perfect life, but a real one, built on honesty and hard work and the courage to try again. "The stars are beautiful tonight," she murmured. "They shine brightest in the darkest places," Caleb replied. "Out here you can always find your way home by them." Lila looked at the ring on her finger, at the man beside her, at the boy who'd already claimed a piece of her heart, at the friends who'd become family. "The stars keep shining," she said softly, echoing their words from that first transformative night. "And this time I'm staying." The fire crackled and sparked. The mountains stood eternal in the distance. And under the vast Montana sky, surrounded by love and light and the promise of all the tomorrows to come, Lila finally understood what home truly meant. It wasn't a place you found. It was a place you built. One choice, one day, one act of courage at a time. And she'd built something beautiful here. Something worth staying for. Something that would last. The end. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this story. We hope it touched your heart as deeply as it touched ours while creating it. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, leave a kind comment, like, and share it. Your support, from the bottom of our hearts, keeps us motivated to bring you more stories full of love, redemption, and emotional turns. At the end of this video, another story suggestion from our channel will appear. Click and let yourself be moved by more heartfelt tales like this one.